Okay, so good afternoon again. After your pause, I hope you used it to network, to exchange information. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm Paola Pinho. I work in the European Commission in the department responsible for just transition, and therefore it's really a pleasure to meet you here today live. Finally, I was asked to do some introductory, to give some introductory words, and then afterwards to moderate our panel in what promises to be a very, very interesting discussion. Now, it's been already above a year that we are witnessing what it means to have a war in Europe and what it means to the energy system, to energy security, and actually how it brings insecurity of energy supply. And it's been really a test to all of us in the European Union on our capacity to get our act together, to have a strong common position, and to really have a willingness to overcome the many challenges that we have been faced with. And guess what? It turned out that we have gone from imports of Russian gas, which used to represent 50% of our gas imports, to below 10%. And this was really the result of a lot of work and cooperation among member states, with the Commission, but also from the regions that you represent. But of course, this has come at a cost. And how often have we heard over the past year that you know about the European Green Deal? Have you heard about it? Well, it's over, it's ended, because we cannot have a European Green Deal. We cannot have a transition from fossil fuels, from coal, if we are to respond to the challenges that we've been facing in terms of energy security. So this has been really an insinuation that we've heard over and over again, and the more so when we started seeing that indeed some coal-fired power plants have been reactivated across Europe. Now, what we want to reply in this session today, was it really so? And was it the end of the European Green Deal? Was it really the end also of our transition in which we had engaged and committed to? This is what we will be hearing in the panel in a few minutes. Now, looking ahead, what I can say already from the EU point of view is that phasing out coal, and by now, I've just joined, but by now, after the session today, you have no doubts about it, it remains a priority for the EU and its member states, and we stay committed to the phase out of coal despite the energy crisis. And this confirms that the transition away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy is ongoing, is well on its way. It demonstrates that Europe's coal phase-out has not been stopped by the energy crisis, and the energy transition is well on track. But again, many perceived a dilemma between the energy transition and the energy security. Now, was it a dilemma? Is it a dilemma? It's again something that we will be hearing in our panel. What we did, again, on the European Commission side, together with the member states, was to rapidly engage in diversifying our energy sources. We cooperated with international partners to find alternative energy supplies, especially suppliers of gas in the short term. Through the REPowerEU, which was adopted in March last year, shortly after the war started, we encouraged energy savings. We encouraged the production of clean energy and the diversification of energy supply. And we've seen remarkable results in terms of real impact. Now, the support of the coal regions was particularly crucial in these times of crisis to ensure energy security while remaining committed to our overall climate objectives. And let me name, just as an example, the Polish region of Wielkopolska, which continuously worked towards its goal to become the region in the country which would abandon coal by 2030. Similarly, last year, the region in Germany, in the Rhine, moved its coal phase-out date forward to 2030, 8 years before Germany's overall coal phase-out date, and this in the midst of an unprecedented energy crisis. And I'm therefore very pleased to have two representatives from these regions here today in the panel to share their experiences. Now, in fact, and that we will be seeing if it's confirmed, overcoming our dependence on Russian fossil fuel has possibly, probably, maybe we'll say after the panel, certainly become an unlikely opportunity for the energy transition. Maybe it didn't put a brake on it, maybe it even accelerated it. Something to be seen whether it is the fact or not. Where there is no denial is that our energy system has gone through enormous pressures, that the accelerated transition has come at a cost. Fact is, energy prices have increased dramatically, which exacerbated, of course, economic and social difficulties for households, for businesses, and for this reason, focusing on a just transition and our goal of leaving no one and no region behind has become even more crucial. The EU will continue to support the just transition in coal and in carbon-intensive regions. And as you have already heard this morning, this year we have entered the implementation phase of the territorial just transition plans, which is really an important milestone in the implementation of a just transition in the EU. And it's not just about financial support, it's about technical assistance and the Coal Regions in Transition initiative. It has been allowing us to share best practice, to share lessons learned, to have guidance materials among the regions affected by the transition, which of course can also apply for technical assistance. So the EU's engagement in supporting coal phase-out and a just transition is strong and present. The energy crisis, however, has had a strong impact on all citizens, especially the more vulnerable ones, and it's for this reason that we need to increase our attention to deliver the transition in a just and a fair way. It has never been so important as it is now. And in this setting, in this context, I'm looking forward to the upcoming discussion with the panelists, who I will be presenting and welcoming to the floor later on. But now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Chris Roslov, Senior Energy and Climate Data Analyst at EMBER, who will present the EMBER's report, European Electricity Review 2023, before the panel discussion. Mr. Roslov, the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us.
Hi everyone, it's nice to be here. Thanks for having me. My name's Chris Roslow. I'm analyst at EMBER, and just in case you don't know, EMBER is a think tank working on the power sector. We work on the power sector and how to decarbonize the power sector all over the world, from Europe, India, and also Southeast Asia. But I'm here, as was said, to present to you the results of our annual European review of the power sector in Europe. So I'll just get my slides up, check that's working. Here we are, great. Sorry for this, I'm just figuring out where I need to point. Oh, there we go. Okay, so to cut straight to the main messages, I'm here to try to convince you of these 4 points. So last year, our data shows that there was no structural return to coal in 2022, or even over the winter months that have just passed. The second message I want you to take away from this is that the temporary increase in coal generation that we did see was a result of abnormal shortages in nuclear and hydropower. That growth in wind and solar prevented an even larger increase in fossil power last year. And finally, actually reduction in demand, in power demand, played a big role and limited the use of fossil fuels, particularly over the winter months that we've just been through. So most of the results that I'll show you today are for 2022, but I also want to show you a few trends in the past few months because they're particularly interesting, especially for coal. Okay, so this is the kind of the long view of the trends in the European power sector. As you can see, going back several decades now, there's been a steady rise in wind and solar, the penetration of those technologies from renewables in the system. And broadly speaking, that has been accompanied by a gradual decline in coal power and also nuclear power that you can see in the two lines on that chart. And where we are now is that for the first time, wind and solar provided more than a fifth of EU electricity last year, and you can see the shares of different fuels in the mix there. That's for the whole EU power mix. And in this chart, we have the changes last year. So in 2022, how was last year different to the year before? And there's a few overall dynamics that I want to highlight. On the left-hand side, you can see huge reductions in nuclear power and hydropower last year. So those reductions resulted from mostly from the unavailability of French nuclear power plants, but also the 1 in 500 year drought that hit Europe last year. So big deficits in those really two important technologies. And just to give you a sense of scale, just from the nuclear and hydro shortages, we lost 7% of power generation across the EU last year. What also happened at the same time is that demand was down last year. So this means that the overall supply needed was less, which is, I suppose that's good news with the shortages that we had in nuclear and hydropower. Still, we had a gap. So what increased to fill that gap? The answer is mostly wind and solar. So you can see in the two green sections of this chart, wind and solar growth helped to fill that gap, and the remainder of that gap was filled by a small increase in coal generation. Just to go a bit more into detail of the nuclear and hydropower issues that I spoke about just now, on the top chart here, you can see the long-term trend in nuclear power. There is a steady decline over the years, but last year there was a very notable decrease, and that can be almost entirely accounted for by France and Germany. So the problems in the French nuclear fleet are well documented, but also we saw the beginning of the end for the German nuclear fleet in terms of generation last year, and those two things combined meant that there was a meaningful decrease in nuclear power last year across Europe, and also hydropower, again relatively stable over the years, but a severe drought last year left us quite short of hydropower. And this is why, again, we saw a temporary increase in fossil power to fill that gap. So I've told you the kind of story in very broad brushstrokes, decrease in nuclear, decrease in hydropower, also a decrease in demand. So I want to zoom in a bit more now on the renewable story, what's happening with renewables in the EU power sector. And solar really has all the momentum right now. So there's without doubt a solar boom happening across Europe. This chart shows you the amount of solar power that's been added every single year to the European grid. You can see in the early 2010s, there was some early progress on solar power. Then the additions really started to drop. But in recent years, solar's had a renaissance, and in the last year in particular, there was a record annual addition of solar, both in terms of capacity and generation onto the system. So that was a record-breaking year, as you can see, by quite some distance for solar power last year. And over the summer, solar power provided more than 10% of the EU's electricity for the first time. As a result of that solar surge that we saw last year, we saw several countries breaking their records for solar power. 20 countries set a new record last year for the penetration of solar power in their country electricity mix. Some countries to highlight are the Netherlands, which generated 14% of power from solar, Greece also with a very high share, and Hungary as well. And a few other kind of renewable headlines from last year. Greece ran for, demand was met by renewables alone in Greece for 5 hours straight in October, which was a first for that country. So overall, very positive outlook and lots of momentum behind solar power in Europe in particular. And this is really important in the context of the energy crisis as well. So this growth in wind power and solar power is coming at the right time when you look at the context and the background in the EU's transition. Because if we look at just the 12-month period since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the growth alone in wind and solar power helped to avoid the need for 12 billion euros worth of gas in that period. So producing that electricity with gas instead would have increased Europe's gas bill by 12 billion, and we all know where that money is going ultimately. And that's 9 BCM of gas imports avoided by this growth in wind and solar. For those of you who are familiar with that unit of gas, which unfortunately we all are right now. Right, so I mentioned that the decrease in power demand across Europe has been an important part of the story, and this graph I think really illustrates that. So in the background here, all these lines, this is power demand across the months of the year in recent years. You can see there's quite a steady trend across the months of the year in most years, the exception being you can see the pandemic there in that grey line that's dropping right down in the spring of 2020. But in green, you can see what's been happening recently. So since around September, we've seen unusually low power demand in Europe. This coincides with, of course, the measures that were introduced, the voluntary reduction of 10% of power demand introduced by the emergency legislation, and also kind of several other measures to save energy. So it does appear so far that that's been working, and there's been a detectable effect on essentially on the overall power demand. And as I was saying earlier, without this drop in demand, we would have needed a lot more fossil generation to kind of fill that gap. So on to coal now. Main reason that we're here. These two charts show recent trends in coal power in two different ways. So I guess the headline from 2022 was yes, there was a small increase in coal generation, 7% up compared to the previous year. But that single stat doesn't really tell the whole story. There has been this trend for a few years now of overall a decline in coal power generation across Europe. But the recent energy crisis, and particularly the price of gas, let's say, caused a bit of a disruption to that long-term trend. And you can see that quite nicely in these charts here. So particularly on the right-hand side, this is the change in coal generation every month compared to the previous year. You can see that 2019-2020 were characterized by a reduction in coal generation. In 2021, we started to see gas prices get very high. And let's remember that gas prices were high before the invasion of Ukraine. The gas crisis predated that particular moment. So gas prices were high. Conditions for coal generation were therefore more favorable in comparison. And we did see this increase, this upward trend in coal generation for a while, for about a year or so. But these last few months, you can see coal power has returned to a decreasing trend across Europe. What's particularly interesting about that is that this is over the winter months where coal is typically having its kind of highest contribution to Europe's power system. So the indications are that we're back on this trajectory of decreasing coal generation. That's what the data is showing us. So I guess I would say that the headline, one of the headlines to take away from this is that there's no big coal comeback in Europe, which is what many speculated or predicted might happen as a result of the energy crisis. Also, the fact that several coal plants and units were brought back online or extended contributed to this narrative that there could be a coal renaissance or a coal comeback in Europe. So what we did was we looked at the units these coal units that have been reactivated or extended, and we found that essentially they were utilized, they were used for sure, but actually not very much, and actually not much more than typical usage. So the average use of these power plants was around a quarter of the time they were functioning across the winter months. This is relevant. Most of this reactivated capacity was in Germany, so we can see, yes, it played a role. It contributed about 6% of all coal generation over winter, but not a major role, and certainly not enough of a role to say coal is back. So I would take from that coal phase-out plans are not wobbling. We've seen no government, no country in Europe put back its commitment to phase out coal. On the contrary, we've seen a few steps towards even earlier coal phase-outs. So a few have been mentioned already. There's the region in Germany that's brought forward the coal phase-out, North Rhine-Westphalia. Romania also brought forward its coal phase-out by 2 years. And in France and the UK, yes, some coal units were extended, but there still remains a commitment to close those final coal units in France and the UK in 2023 and 2024. So no change to the overall policy, despite some emergency measures for this winter. Right, so that's the end of my look back over the last year and the last winter. Now I want to spend a few moments talking about where we're heading this year. So this is where you have to trust me, and I get my crystal ball and say, if I'm stood here this time next year, what am I telling you about the power system and what's happened in 2023? So you've seen this chart on the left already. That's the change in 2022. Next to it on the right is what we think could happen in the next year. So we think that there'll be roughly speaking, no change in nuclear generation because we will have some of the French fleets returning to production. But as I'm sure as you all know, the German nuclear fleet is completely closed now. So we see those two things roughly balancing out against each other and cancelling each other out. We do expect to see a return of hydropower to its kind of seasonal average, which gives us a bit of a boost on the renewable generation. It's widely predicted that there'll be another year of record wind and solar production, more growth in that area, so the green bar there going up. And what looks to be happening so far is this reduction in power demand across Europe seems to be persisting into this year. So when you add all those things together, you essentially get a big drop in fossil generation, a drop that's shared roughly equally between coal and gas. So that orange bar plummeting all the way down corresponds to around a 20% fall in generation from fossil fuels this year in 2023 compared to 2022. So that's our prediction. I'll be very happy to come back this time next year and tell you how close we were with that one. So finally, a few reasons for kind of optimism for the coming years. This is the growth in solar again. So the latest industry forecasts shows quite remarkable growth for solar in the coming years. So in the past 4 years, the installed capacity of solar doubled, and in the next 4 years, we're looking at that tripling. So this really is quite remarkable growth in solar capacity and generation. And this amount of solar, by the way, if we keep this up until 2030, it'll be far exceeding what's needed for the REPowerEU targets. So it's really impressive growth. And what I think is my final slide, I've got some hockey sticks for you here, some hockey stick charts. And whenever there's a climate talk, hockey sticks are normally bad news, right? Because it's normally the temperature, global warming going off the roof of the chart. But this is actually solar, and this is solar in Europe's top 4 coal countries. So we have, going clockwise, Germany, Poland, Bulgaria, and Czechia. I think it's particularly striking in Czechia, where the installed capacity of solar has been flat for many years. But the signs are that this is now finally beginning to take off, and we can expect quite a lot of growth in these countries. And the solar boom will be hitting these coal countries as well as the rest of Europe. It's not all great news with renewables. There are very clear and obvious problems with deploying wind power across Europe, which, unlike solar, is not looking like it's quite on track for the REPowerEU targets and renewable targets in Europe. Nevertheless, this is a positive message to take away that the solar boom will be coming to kind of coal regions and has benefits for all of Europe in the next few years. So I'll leave it there, I think, and thanks again for your attention.
Any questions to Chris? We'll give it a go. No? Then we'll give you a possibility to think about it and still come back with a panel. Thank you very much, Chris, really for setting the scene with real facts and figures and demystifying this perception, which clearly based on your presentation shows that it's an inaccurate perception of a big coal comeback. And consider yourself already invited for next year this time, where we will confront you with your projections. But I really do hope that all you projected will materialize. And with this, we will then proceed with our panel discussion, and we will be dividing it into two parts. The first part will focus on what have been the policy responses to the energy crisis and the commitment to coal phase-out and just transition. Then we will do a small break, not to leave, but to hear from the audience through a poll that we will be doing through Slido. And then this will take us to the second part of the panel, where we will be discussing lessons learned and the future perspectives for the energy transition. The idea is really to learn from the past and to apply it in the future. And for this, I'm very, very pleased to invite and to have with us four great panelists that I would introduce and welcome, starting with Rebecca Popp. Welcome, Rebecca. Please have a seat. Rebecca is a policy advisor in the independent climate change think tank E3G, and she is part of the fossil fuel transition team there, works on coal phase-out and just transition, and her main focus lies on Germany and Central and Eastern Europe. Welcome, Rebecca. With us also is Maciej Sitek. Maciej from Poland, where he is plenipotentiary of the management board of the Wielkopolska province that I mentioned already. Welcome. And he is also the president of the Regional Development Agency and of ARR Transformacja. Maciej is the initiator and the main coordinator of the just transition in the region. Then also with us, Alexandra Landsberg. Alexandra is the head of Department of the Economic Development and Structural Policy at the Ministry of Economic Affairs, Innovation, Digitalization and Energy of the state of North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany. Alexandra is also managing the structural charge Rhenish Revier unit that deals precisely with just transition in this German state. And last but not least, Julio Castro González holds the position of Managing Director at Iberdrola Energía Sostenible España, and is which is an energy company active in the transition to clean energies. So without further ado, I would kickstart with a question to Maciej Sitek. And Maciej, Wielkopolska was the first Polish region with a fair transition plan in 2020. And it has the ambitious goal to achieve climate neutrality by 2040, so a decade earlier than the EU target. And as we've heard, and this may have come as a surprise to some from Chris, The coal generation in Poland even went down last year. Now, in the new context of the energy crisis, and given your region's head start in the transition, how would you say the perspective on coal phase-out and just transition has changed in the region through the energy crisis, both for the main actors and stakeholders, and also for the citizens? Please.
Thank you. You need interakcja because I speak by Polish.
Thank you. So we all have the time to...
Okay. Okay?
Yes,
Yes?
Let's see.
No dobra, to już wrażenie zrobiłem na sam początek. Cała sala została poruszona moim wystąpieniem. A mówiąc poważnie, jeżeli chodzi o transformację Wielkopolski Wschodniej, to ten termin 2030, o którym pierwotnie było mówione, już jest nieaktualny. My zakończymy wydobycie i spalanie węgla w 2025 roku. Ostatnie odkrywki zostaną zamknięte do końca 2024, a następnie wygaszona elektrownia węglowa. W tym sensie nie zmieniło się nic. Znaczy nie zmieniliśmy ani kropki w naszym planie transformacji, uważając, że nie możemy w tej chwili się cofnąć. To jest sytuacja, w której oczywiście niektórzy mogą powiedzieć, OK, ale jest kryzys, brakuje energii. Natomiast wydaje mi się, że w tej chwili doszliśmy do takiego momentu i wszystkie regiony, które przeszły tą dosyć męczącą i trudną drogę, przygotowując się do transformacji, że właściwie w tej chwili nie możemy się cofnąć. Jednoznacznie.
About 20 years ago, we had a change in our, let's say, organization chart. A new chairman and CEO at the time was recruited, was hired, and he came to a, let's say, a common, traditional utility with networks, with customers under a monopoly, because that was the case in Spain, and with a generation fleet based on hydro, nuclear power, and coal. That was the case in that moment. Our new chairman implemented a vision, and that vision became to be a mission. And the mission is investment in renewables. Across the time, these things have changed. Today, it's a little bit more complex. It's not only renewables, it's also decarbonizing through renewables. But not only having the renewables, just entering into the demand side, trying to avoid all what is related with the carbon emissions. So, which is the reason why we are a kind of an example of a company in renewables? Well, it comes from business. It comes from having a vision to have growth related with a new activity. Many of our competitors in those years, at the end of the 90s, when we were under the umbrella of an association of monopolists, somehow that was the case, because the opening of the market was not yet implemented by the directive in Europe, at least in Spain. We decided to have a different way of growing, and that became to be a profitable and sustainable business. Is this a correct choice across the time? Is this a correct entrepreneurial answer? Since 2 years ago, after this turmoil that we all are suffering from in Europe? Absolutely, yes. Because I think that not only it's a correct choice, but it is the solution with capital letters. We have to make a choice of being sustainable in emissions, so not having those emissions and having abatement on that emissions. But also, as Rebecca was mentioning, we have to have a choice of being affordable, We have to be competitive. And the lesser LCOE that you can find today if you want to implement a new power station is, depending on where you are in Europe, something related with wind or solar. And that is the economic reality. Then you need to take some other decisions, because you need the backup, you need the storage, you need the market, many other decisions. But the installation has to be through the renewal view. But, as I'm saying, affordable and climate sustainable. But also, that becomes you to be independent, because security of supply is a paradigm that is somehow an old one. Now you have to be independent, not only safe on supply, but more and more becoming to be independent with your own means to have the electricity on. You need to have the approach to become independent, affordable, protecting the customers, and being climate responsible. Just a last, let's say, sentence or thinking about what we have been living recently. The interventions that we've been implementing all across this crisis, maybe some of them today, those are not needed, because the level of pricing in natural gas and in electricity have changed a lot. But we have to think if it is fair to put all the effort on the electricity-only companies. And we have to think far beyond electricity, start to think in oil and gas, coal, and whatever other source of supply that we may be having. Because when we are talking about extraordinary revenues, we have to think that those extraordinary revenues are not exactly those coming from renewable energy. Those are coming specifically from oil and gas. So there's a lot to say about this in
Thank you, Julio. And indeed, it brought us in a wider discussion. And just to say that indeed, as part of the emergency measures, there were the additional revenues, not just from the electricity companies, but also from the oil and gas companies, were used as to be redistributed to consumers. This was part of the emergency measures. But thank you for putting it in the broader picture and also reminding us of a new concept of security of supply, which is also about independence, and this crisis certainly has reminded us of this. And now I think we have good news, and that we'll be able to go back to Maciej with interpretation. So please take it from where we left it. So there is no way back.
Już nie pamiętam. I don't remember. Okay.
There was no way back. No way back in your decision.
Okay. Myślę, że kryzys, który w tej chwili przeżywamy, jest także swego rodzaju lekcją i wyciągnięcie wniosków z tego kryzysu może w przyszłości rozwiązać bardzo wiele problemów.
Done so, please insert the password that will be shown, well, that is being shown on the big screen in the room, which is the hashtag JTP2023, and you should be set to submit your answers. So if we are this far, there will be 2 questions asked to you through Slido. The first question is, what was the biggest impact of the energy crisis on just transition in your view? And the options are, was it an accelerated deployment of renewable energy? Is it an increased attention to energy poverty? Is it a slowed down deployment of renewable energy sources? Or did it highlight gender inequalities? Maybe we want to take several options, but I think you have to make an option, the one which you believe was the biggest impact. And an accelerated deployment of renewables, I think it goes back also very much to the presentation from Chris, who showed us with facts and figures that indeed there has been such an accelerated deployment. but also very, very close. Now first place, increased attention to energy poverty, which is indeed also the case, and now we need to act on it, and there are a number of provisions in the recently adopted legislation on energy from the Climate Social Fund, from the Energy Efficiency Directive, which point precisely to measures aimed at tackling energy poverty. So good, then we can, but really neck on neck, the two first replies. Then let's go to the next question, which is, what were the three main lessons for the just transition that you learned from the energy crisis? And the options, up to 3, so here you have the possibility to choose multiple answers. Is it an increased energy efficiency, saving energy, better understanding of the energy bills, the need to speed up renewable sources of energy, the need for independence from Russian fossil fuels, and the spillover effects of high energy prices? And again, here we have 2 answers neck on neck: need to speed up renewables, and need for independence from Russian fossil fuels. And I think one has led to the other. Clearly, the need to speed up renewables also came as an answer to the need for independence from Russian fossil fuels. But indeed, it's not enough to speed up renewables. We also need to save energy and increase energy efficiency. And these are certainly good lessons to be drawn and to act on, and some of this hopefully will also become structural. So again, very close, the 2 first answers. I wish I would see more on the increasing energy efficiency, but there, together with saving energy, and clearly it's a no regrets, both energy efficiency and saving energy. Very good. So to comment on these results, and we will see now the results on the screen, I'd like to can we see the results on the screen for the 2, or is not foreseen? No. So it's just, so you just remember from the previous question, and we take it from here. So thank you very much for participating in the poll, and I think this is exactly the good transition to the next part, which is precisely lessons learned, and hearing from our panelists what are lessons learned. And so let's start again with Maciej to see if we're luckier this time. Probably not, so we'll have to rely on our very kind interpreter who volunteered. So the question would be precisely to hear from you which were the opportunities that arose from the energy transition versus energy security dilemma in your region. So which lessons have you learned from the past year, and how do you see your situation going forward, especially in the just transition context of Poland as a whole?
Myślę, że dla regionu Wielkopolski Wschodniej to jest...
It's working now.
Jest. Czego się nauczyliśmy, nie wierzyć technologii. Ale myślę, że dla Wielkopolski Wschodniej jest to ogromna szansa. To znaczy, wydaje mi się, że doszliśmy do takiego momentu w Wielkopolsce Wschodniej, w której wyczerpaliśmy pewną formułę funkcjonowania gospodarczego. I to właśnie dzięki spotkaniom na Platformie, kiedy przyjechaliśmy tutaj w 2018 roku, dostrzegliśmy szansę zmiany. Kryzys energetyczny jeszcze bardziej wyostrzył tą sytuację i spowodował, że w tej chwili jesteśmy bardzo mocno zdecydowani na to, żeby całą gospodarkę podporządkować zielonej transformacji, tworząc zupełnie jak gdyby nowe oblicze regionu, nową tożsamość dla regionu. I wydaje mi się, że wszystkie regiony w Europie, które przeżywają, my jesteśmy bardzo podobnym regionem, na przykład do wschodnich regionów niemieckich, gdzie ten kryzys jest bardzo podobny i powoduje, że mierzymy się z depopulacją, z różnego rodzaju problemami, które dotknęły naszych sąsiadów dzięki współpracy, ale także dzięki temu, że ten kryzys w tej chwili nastąpił, nagle się okazało, że jesteśmy troszeczkę dalej, że przepracowaliśmy pewne rzeczy i dzisiaj dzięki temu mamy szansę zbudować zupełnie nową przestrzeń w naszym regionie.
Thank you very much. And it did work this time. Very pleased for that. So really, at the end, the crisis as an opportunity which needs to be seized, and your region certainly sees this opportunity. Then this time, let's proceed with Julio. Iberdrola is part of the agreement for a just transition for coal power plants, which was agreed in March 2021 with the Spanish government. Companies that own coal-fired power stations in Spain and the trade union organizations were part of this agreement. It commits the national governments to offer affected workers vocational training and help finding a new job, relocate workers, and offer upskilling and reskilling programs. Can you tell us a little bit more, Julio, about this strategy and how you see the future perspectives on just energy transition?
Indeed, I will. But before that, if you allow me, the two questions in the poll were answered exactly the same. Everybody wants more renewable energy.
Yes.
And how do we implement this? Because there's daylight, there's wind, there's land in Europe. What's missing? Because I think that we are not developing renewable energy at the speed that we need to become independent. The answer, well, everybody knows, is permitting. Permitting is not working. So whoever is working in the renewable energy industry or in the administration, I think that we all have a lot of homework to implement, which is how we implement changes in the permitting process so that we can cope with warranties for citizens, so that we don't spoil the environmental values or we take care of whoever's property, but we need to have an industrial permit in something like 1 year and a half or so. It takes 5 years in Germany. It takes 7 years in France. It can take 3 years in Spain. It's a disaster. Unless we fix something in digitizing, in outsourcing, in having some legal implementations like silence, which becomes positive or so, there will not be any solution. It's only a topic in a flag, but nothing happens. And then answering to your question, I would like to enter into an example instead of providing you a general sentence. Iberdrola had 2 coal-fired stations in the north of Spain, in the north and northwest, and when we decided to shut down, we implemented technical measures in order to start with the demolition, decontamination of the land, taking care of the crews, of the people that is working with us, being relocated, some of them being retired because they were for a long time in the place. But we also decided to implement all the ESG, all the social responsibility issues as part of the plan, not as an attachment, just in the middle of the plan. And we decided to invest in renewables in those places, if the resource is available, and focusing more in Asturias, a region in the northwest, and we have here the Director General for Energy of Asturias. So if I am wrong, please, Mini, just come to the stage, and I will be listening and learning from you. We decided to go for wind farms in the area. Of course, you cannot be exactly in the same site, but you can be in the same region. So that's something that you have to negotiate with the unions, and you can move people from the crews in the coal-fired station into the wind farms. We decided to create citizen platforms in order to encourage the creativity to develop some entrepreneurial ideas, and things happen. We enter into circular economy projects as well. We decided to support with investment some of the local entrepreneurial ideas. And this works, but that's maybe not enough. So recently we have decided to implement, to put in the same site, the first factory of solar PV modules, panels, that we have in Spain, a factory. This factory has an agreement with the manufacturer. Of course, we are not. We are not an expert, but we are an investor that we are trying to make this to become alive. And as far as we know, according to the plan, and with our partner, and with the help of the administration, you have to hunt everybody together. Alone, you do nothing. We have succeeded in saying that in about 1 year from now, the first panel will be produced. Of course, we are one of the buyers of the product. This is so-called the Axiom solution plant. But that's not only the solution. We have many other ideas, like some coming from decarbonizing processes of the industry, and where you have a coal-fired station, always anywhere in Europe, in the north of Italy, in Poland, in Germany, you have a community of industry nearby. So this industry has heat needs. And we have started to work with some of the players, thinking in decarbonizing those heat processes with renewables, mainly with solar PV, inside or through a PPA as well. We have developed a solar community in the town hall, in the municipality, and we have changed we are collaborating to change the region, and please, Mini, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe we are not doing a good job, but instead of purchasing coal, today we purchase offshore wind towers, jackets, solar PV structure. We are with substations development, power line development. I mean, we have created a community in the neighborhood of Asturias of very top-level industry related with the renewable energy. And that is always related with the contract. You need to invest in trust and in money to get the high-value product, which the region can develop, so that we all together learn and grow.
Thank you very much. So the example and the testimony from a company and how it is going about the transition in very, very concrete terms. And also this very interesting example of bringing in also the manufacturing, which is very much in the logic of the recent Net Zero Industry Act that the Commission adopted, which is also about bringing back the manufacturing of clean energy technologies to Europe. And you presented as also a part of reply to a just transition in a given region. Thank you very much. And
Paula, if you allow me just a headline. The first ever offshore wind farm in the United States of America is developed right now in front of the area of Connecticut, or the area of New York, Long Island, the Martha's Vineyard area, very popular from the movies, but also for a very strong offshore wind resource. The first monopile that is going to be installed in the coming days has been manufactured in Asturias, in a company that is developing this kind of a technical product in a place where 25 years back there was only a coal mountain in the seaport.
Very good news, and it's not just about own consumption, it's also then business opportunities for exports. So I think very telling examples. Then let's go on to Alexander. And as we discussed before, despite the energy crisis, You moved your coal phase out from 2038 to 2030. Now, how do you plan to achieve this much earlier phase-out date? And are you planning specific measures to ensure a just transition in the upcoming years?
What we see after the crisis with Ukraine started is that the idea to phase out fossil fuels are much more stable, if it's coal or it's gas. So the earlier we step in new jobs, the better. So currently we are in the implementation phase of a large number of support measures. We've got about 300 projects in process in the Rhenish mining area, 130 projects with about 2 billion euros have now been approved. And what we do now is to focus very hard on the objectives we have for 2030. So we do big steps for the new energy system to make it work in 2030. We focus on innovation to have new employment in 2030. We need new industries. We need transformated industries. For example, we work on the fossil-free refinery of Shell. We produce raw materials from carbon dioxide, or we make research on that. And we make research on the question how we can make paper without water. And so our industries that are special for the Rhenish area may have new opportunities to work in a more fossil fuel way and to do this already in 2030. So we have also a lot of work on new life quality because of the big open cast mines. We set milestones every 2 years so that 24, 26, 28, 2030 is a way and not just we start now and wonder if we may hit our objectives. And I think there's a lot of work to do. There are a lot of people with a lot of different ideas. Not always everybody thinks about the same things, and not everybody says the same things are important. Sometimes we discuss what has to be done, but we think you can phase out coal till 2030, and we can tackle the change in the region. We can get neutral in our energy production, and it's just a way we have to go with a long atom. We have to get a driving force for that.
Very good. Indeed, and clearly that such fundamental changes, which, as we're seeing, it doesn't concern one single sector. It's really a paradigm shift across the society, requires the contribution from all. It's not only dependent on a regional actor. You really need to bring all together.
I think it's what we can get in all our coal regions all over Europe, that we get role models for industrial transformation to a new economic way to work sustainable in Europe, to make economic sustainable in Europe. And here's more money than in other transformation regions. And if we can get that, that might be well a good idea for our whole society.
Very good. And so then to conclude on this second round of questions to Rebecca now, based on your research, how do you think the energy crisis will impact the future perspectives on a just transition and the coal phase out in the EU?
Well, I think now I need Christopher's crystal ball as well. No, I think the EU countries are very well prepared to go ahead with the coal phase out. So the funding is in place to support these transition processes in the region. There's also the governance framework with the territorial just transition plans. And I think it's really important that governments take this very seriously, because we also have a strengthened EU emission trading system, which will mean that the carbon price will get higher over the next years, and at the end of the decade, coal will become very expensive. So I think it's really important that governments now take the opportunity with the Just Transition Fund in place to prepare coal regions properly for this reality. But then, of course, the EU should not stop just at phasing out coal. So, I mean, the energy crisis has really given a new urgency to cutting gas demand. And it's very important that the EU gets independent from fossil fuels. I think we've seen this in the polling just now, that this was also one of the main lessons from the energy crisis. And I think getting independent from fossil fuels really will become the key project for the EU over the coming years, also after the EU elections next year. And it's really critical because the EU needs to get on a path for a clean power sector until 2035. That's a benchmark that was identified by the International Energy Agency. It's been also reaffirmed by the G7 last year. And so it really requires this long-term planning to get the EU on the right path until 2035. And obviously, this also needs to be accompanied by a shift in the just transition debate. So it needs to become more forward-looking, because we've been talking about energy efficiency measures, about increasing the share of renewables. But what's really an issue is the massive skills shortage that we have in clean industries. And this is really a make or break for the energy transition in the EU. If we don't have the people that can install the solar panels or the heat pumps in homes, then really the EU's energy targets are at risk. So I think that's really important for just transition conversations like this one, for example, to look at the solutions that need to be implemented to get more people into these green sectors. And I think that's also a place where coal regions have an important role to play and can benefit a lot.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and also confirming what we said before. This needs to be part of a broader ecosystem and discussion. And we are running a bit late, but still would like to give the possibility for the audience to ask questions. And I already see one question back there. Please, if you can say who you are, so that we can situate you better, and then who you'd like to ask the question to.
Hi, my name is Miłka Stępień. I'm from CE Bank Watch Network. I'm actually also from Eastern Wielkopolska, like Maciej Sytek over there. So we work together, but it's a question comment. The main question that we have here is how to guarantee energy security for all. And two of the things that I was missing here were comments on the two biggest barriers. So I know the Ember report very well, and thank you, Christoph, for presenting it. And I think that two of the things that also sort of come out of that report is where these biggest barriers are. And I'd like to ask how you are handling these in your countries. So the biggest barriers, I would say, are grid development. So we can see on the example of Greece, where there was a 200% increase in energy communities in 2022, that the biggest stopper of this was, in fact, the lack of grid development or grid modernization, which is necessary in order to introduce such high amounts of renewable energy sources. And I'm wondering how you are handling this also in your countries. And the second biggest barrier is legislation. So there was a mention of the Poland, where you have the 10H rule for wind power. For example, there's no good legislation for energy communities. So if we are to guarantee energy security for for all. One of the things we should be talking about here is not only about industrial changes or changes in the industry, but changes in general about who owns power, because we haven't been talking enough about energy communities here.
Okay. So you're
the
already
question is,
giving us the answer. So
yeah,
maybe
the question is to the panelists,
yes,
how they're planning to sort of push for this guarantee of security for all, for the energy communities in particular.
Okay, so for the energy security in particular, can we give it a go with all 4 panelists very, very shortly? Who wants to start? Julio?
Green indigenous energy plus backup, relying on a capacity mechanism that makes that reliable across the time. So 2 ingredients, quite easy.
Good. Maciej?
Ja myślę, że potrzebujemy jednej rzeczy, to znaczy to, co Miłka mówiła a propos braku sieci, ale także braku koordynacji europejskiej dotyczących stabilizacji energii z odnawialnych źródeł energii. Największym zarzutem jest to, że energia odnawialna jest sezonowa. Wystarczyłoby stworzyć europejski system elektrowni, które będą w pogotowiu, które będą mogły dostarczać z jednego kraju do drugiego, zresztą to już funkcjonuje, energię w sytuacjach kryzysowych. Tydzień temu w Polsce wyprodukowaliśmy taką ilość energii, że system musiał zostać wytworzony, bo były dobre warunki i nie mieliśmy gdzie jej upchnąć. Jeżeli zbudujemy sensowny europejski system stabilizacji energii na całym naszym obszarze, to będziemy mogli dużo więcej energii zielonej, czy energii wiatrowej, czy słonecznej wyprodukować i rozwijać te źródła energii.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you reinforce the point about energy communities, because I think because we're talking about how can a just energy transition and energy security go hand in hand, and I think during the crisis, energy communities have actually been a good example where energy has remained somewhat affordable because they rely on wind and solar. But I think going forward, it will be really important that governments across the EU set the right policy frameworks and actually don't get distracted by focusing, for example, on, well, expanding coal mines again, for example, but really focus on creating the right environment for renewables to thrive. And I think that's also where the Commission has a very important role to make clear this is the direction that the EU is heading towards a clean power system. I think that will also be very important to continuously reiterate that.
Thank you very much.
Yes. I think it's much easier to build up renewable energies if some of the winds are for people or for the community where you live in, for the town you live in. So we should do there much more.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Good. Then we'd go for another. I think we have to have it as a final question. And now I have to decide which one to pick.
Thank you. I'm Anna Bayomi from FAN, the Federation of Organizations Working with the Homeless. I'm working on energy poverty, focusing on the most vulnerable households. During this day, I learned a lot, but I've been missing the focus on low-income households that will bear the cost of energy poverty harder than the rest of the population. And therefore, my question is whether the Just Transition Fund is providing enough support for low-income households to transition to clean energy sources. Many of these households are living in homes that are not ready for heat pumps and solar energy and need really heavy investment. And at the same time, these households are not attractive to private investment, bank loans, etc. Therefore, I'm interested whether the funding is enough to cover the transition of these households.
Okay. There are different funds for different purposes, and indeed there are some dedicated funds, but if anyone wants to come in on this also from your own experience.
Okay.
Thank you, Maciej.
Spróbuję odpowiedzieć. Dostrzegamy ten problem. W Wielkopolsce Wschodniej mamy 90 000 budynków do termomodernizowania, z czego 20 000 to są budynki właśnie ludzi ubogich, którzy nie są w stanie sobie pomóc. I tutaj staramy się znaleźć jakieś rozwiązania, które pozwolą na to, żeby musimy dotrzeć do tych ludzi, oni muszą sobie uświadomić, że w momencie, w którym skorzystają z możliwości na przykład ocieplenia swojego domu, to w perspektywie będą płacili mniej. Nie mają tej świadomości. Tak naprawdę czasami funduszy w Polsce jest sporo. Na przykład jest fundusz jest rządowy program, gdzie nawet 90% jest dopłaty do możliwości termomodernizacji mieszkania, ale większość z tych ludzi nie zdaje sobie sprawy, że dzięki temu, że stermomodernizuje i zapłaci 2-3 tysiące złotych, będzie mogło oszczędzić na przykład na energii zamiast 5 000 rocznie zapłacą 2 czy 1000 złotych. To jest kwestia świadomości i tutaj jest ogromne zadanie z docieraniem do tych ludzi, bo programów jest sporo. Tyle tylko, że musimy znaleźć możliwość dotarcia do tych mieszkańców i ich wsparcia i tutaj jest zadanie gmin, nasze zadanie właściwie wszystkich lokalnych organizacji. My w Wielkopolsce w tej chwili zbudowaliśmy przy projekcie LIFE, który mamy, udało nam się w tym roku dostać 18 milionów euro i tworzymy w każdej gminie doradcę ekologicznego. Ten doradca ekologiczny ma pójść do każdego mieszkańca, rozmawiać z nim, pomagać mu napisać wnioski w taki sposób, żeby mógł sięgnąć po pieniądze, które są, bo Komisja Europejska czy fundusze europejskie bardzo dużo pieniędzy przeznaczyły na tego typu działania. Problem polega na tym, że ci, którzy są świadomi, korzystają z tego i robią to dobrze, ale część ludzi w ogóle nie ma świadomości. Dlatego musimy pójść i im pokazać, jak mają z tego skorzystać.
Thank you very much. And Alexander, you still wanted to come in on this one?
I personally have a house from 1937. And we just discussed what to do with photovoltaic on the rooftop. We do something on the windows, and we discuss about a heat pump. And my income is a very good income, I think. And what you asked is the problem, what is with people who cannot afford this? And I think we haven't solved this problem already. There's so much more to discuss. In Germany, we have the discussion, everybody who has a ROMT heat next year has to have a new heat with renewable energies. And we discuss about months now what we might invest in our heat pump. And I think this is an amount that this is far, far away from be possibly paid by everyone. So I think this is a real problem we have to solve, and we haven't done that already.
Yeah. And really this question also points to the fact that the fair transition is much more, it's broader than just the phasing out of coal, and one lesson that we learned also from the crisis is precisely that we need to address this just and fair transition with a much broader lens, because it's not just about the coal regions, and there are many energy poor and vulnerable citizens that are suffering from it. With a big, big thanks to our panelists. I will try in half a minute to make to give a takeaway from our very rich discussion. So on the question which triggered the panel, is there a dilemma between energy security and energy transition? I think clearly the reply is not only there is no dilemma, but actually combining both energy security and energy transition is absolutely crucial for us to achieve what is our common goal of a sustainable and socially fair transition. We also concluded that once you are in the pathway to phase out from coal, there's no way back. And if it is true that there has been some uptake of coal, this was because if it was an emergency measure and should stay temporary. And again, the reason why we there is no way back is because it's all part of a much broader ecosystem where we need to tackle the uptake of renewables, which requires a proper grid development, but also permitting. It's the take-up of energy efficiency. It's the modern approach to energy security, which is about independence. It's about skills, because no matter how ambitious we are in terms of deployment and energy transition, if we don't have the necessary people to do it, will not be able to deliver. It's also an opportunity. Out of this crisis, we've seen that many regions have seized the opportunity and are making the best out of it, even using it as an industrial and business opportunity. And so I think we can shortly conclude there is no such dilemma, and we can reconcile both energy security and transition. And from our side, we can assure you that we remain committed to achieving this just energy transition while safeguarding energy security. And we will be meeting again at the annual political dialogue of the Coal Regions in Transition Initiative that is taking place this year in the Karlovy Vary region in the Czech Republic on the 27th and the 28th of June this year. So here already an invitation for all of you who want to join. This political dialogue is the occasion for political representatives and other stakeholders from all EU coal regions to gather, take stock of the progress achieved since we started the Coal Regions in Transition Initiative 5 years ago already, and discuss the common challenges we face and identify also solutions. So I'm pleased to invite you to register for this event. You can do so through the QR code now visible on the screen. And to give us a bit more detail about this event, and before concluding and inviting you to still socialize a bit outside, I would like to ask Mr. Petr Kulhanek, Governor of the Karlovy Vary region, to give us a bit more details about this annual political dialogue. Yes.
Good late afternoon. I think all the details were said already. However, as it was said, it's my pleasure as the governor of the Karlovy Vary region, together with EU Commission and Karlovy Vary region, to invite you to the EU initiative, the Coal Regions in Transition's 4th annual political dialogue, which will be held in the UNESCO site, Karlovy Vary, in the region which goes through transition. And it will be definitely the opportunity for all stakeholders to get together and discuss the success, to discuss the history, to discuss the good practice, and to discuss the future. And I'm sure not the future only until 2027, but also after 2027. I think we will present all the important leaders which are designing and implementing the transitions on all levels, on the regional levels, in Coal Plus regions, in EU capital levels, and in Brussels levels as well. And I'm happy that we will have the representation of the EU Commission as well. We will have the Kadri Simpson, the EU Commissioner for Energy, and still to be confirmed, but I'm sure it will be done so, the EU Commissioner for Cohesion and Reforms. We had this morning Mrs. Ferreira to come to Karlovy Vary. So please don't forget to register this, to this beautiful event, which will be held in newly renovated National Monument Emperor Spa in Karlovy Vary, in the heart of the town. And we will be looking forward to welcome in Karlovy Vary and to discuss with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.